everyone. This is the end of year of games 2024, specifically all the games I played that came out last year. And I made sure to specifically do games I finished last year because I wanted to keep it fair. But I think the only game that would probably make the list if I kept on playing it was Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. But yeah, we're gonna do a ranking system. So on the left are all the games I've played from last year. Celeste 64, Arzette, The Jewel of Faramir, I think is what it's called, Balatro, Penny's Big Breakaway, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Berserk Boy, Princess Peach Showtime, Another Crab's Treasure, Animal Well, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Multiverses, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Mega Man X8 16-bit, Astrobot, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Sonic X Shadow Generations, Mario and Luigi Brothership, and Marvel Rivals. So for this list, I want to try and go worst to best because I think it's easier to calculate my thoughts on the recent stuff, especially Astrobot, since that's like the closest thing I've beaten. Yeah, I beat it near the tail end, at the tail end of December. So yeah, so we'll go from number 18 to number 1, Heroic Sniper Story. I'll just put the game on there and I'll give my very brief thoughts on the game. So that out of the way, let's get started. So I think it's pretty easy to guess what is the worst game I've played this year. Well, I'd say so anyway, but yeah, it was Multiverses. The best way to describe Multiverses is that it's Smash Bros without the gameplay appeal of Smash Bros. Like, Multiverses still has the core appeal of Smash where it's a giant crossover. But honestly, I think the one thing we keep on ignoring when talking about Smash clones is the gameplay side of it. Cause yeah, we do love Smash for its crossover appeal, but it's also generally a fun game to play no matter what you think of it as an overall package. Multiverses just isn't fun to play as, honestly. Like, I played it and it has the basic controls you expect from a Smash clone, but it's so floaty and slow at the same time, and it just makes it just not all that fun to play as, in my opinion. I also just think that overall it just shows how very, not corrupt, but predictable. Yeah, that's the best word. It shows how predictable the current state of gaming is in terms of what we expect from it. I have no interest in ever going back to Multiverses, ever. And I honestly don't care what gets shown. I'm also not really much of a Warner Bros. Guy. Like, I enjoyed some of their properties. Like, I love Tom and Jerry, but like, I don't really care that much about like Cartoon Network stuff or even Scooby-Doo for that matter. So the next one is, so that's the only outright bad game I played this year, or last year. So I'll just go with the mid option, as I would call it, actually. So yeah, we'll go with the next option, which is Princess Princess Peach Showtime. Princess Peach Showtime is probably the most disappointed I've been in a game in a hot minute. So I think what makes Princess Peach Showtime a disappointment is how it doesn't feel like a Nintendo game. And by that logic, I mean, it's obviously made by Nintendo, but what makes Nintendo appealing is its family appeal. And Princess Peach Showtime doesn't seem to be targeting the family audience, it seems to be targeting the female audience mostly. Which isn't a bad thing as long as the game is fun, but I'd just say that Princess Peach Showtime's a functional game, but not a fun one. Like, it has a very shallow moveset, which is funny considering like there's variety in this game, but the variety doesn't offer much, honestly. And also it's like one of the like more interesting Switch games in terms of its performance. It chugs in the overworld sections, but surprisingly not that badly in the Showtime segments. It's also a good feel game, which is something I didn't know until like the very last minute when I beat it. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Princess Peach Showtime. It's probably the most disappointing Nintendo game I played ever, honestly. So now we get to the good stuff. I guess Marvel Rivals seems about right. Marvel Rivals is pretty fun. So a little context. I grew up with Overwatch, but not to say I grew up with it, but like I was there when it was the hit new shooter game or multiplayer craze, and I quite liked Overwatch. And so after kind of growing out of it and the sting that was Overwatch 2, I kind of never got that same feeling ever from a multiplayer game. Like, sure, I love me some fighting games and I do enjoy Team Fortress 2, but it's just not the same. I would say Marvel Rivals is the closest we're gonna get from what I've played out of all of them. It definitely does have that Overwatch influence, like straight up Spider-Man's ultimate move is Reaper's ultimate, and Rocket Raccoon has it's not Bastion, it's Moira's healing orbs and all that stuff. Like, you can very tell it's wearing its influence on its sleeve, but I personally never minded that because I thought Marvel Rivals, ever since I first touched it, was pretty fun. Like, it's similar to Overwatch, and Overwatch is fun, and I thought the characters, while some are better than others, they still require you to utilize their movesets and all that stuff. I will say I'm not the biggest fan of the team up mechanic because it doesn't because sometimes it offers like a huge advantage like Spider-Man and Venom. But other times it's like the Punisher and Rocket where it's very minuscule and doesn't really change much about it. I do think Marvel Rivals has potential to be on par with Overwatch, but at its moment it's pretty good, and I'm excited to see what else they got. Okay, do you want to put Arzette or Berserk Boy on here? Well, I'll do Arzette. Arzette is a weird one. It came out in like early 2024, and it was basically a sequel to the CDI Zelda games. And that's kind of funny to think about. Now, I've never played the CDI Zelda games, but I had fun with Arzette for what it was. Though, I will say, Arzette is basically dependent on how much you are a fan of the aesthetic of CDI Zelda. Like, are you a fan of the cutscenes? Are you a fan of the overall gameplay and stuff like that? And I liked the gameplay enough. I thought it was pretty good for what it was, and it was fun at moments. But it was very shallow feeling. It's very of its time is the best way to describe it. And while I do think the cutscenes are very charming in their own unique way, it's still the CDI cutscenes in terms of quality, so it's not like unironically funny, it's ironically funny is the best way to describe it. I also just wasn't a fan of the boss fights in this one. They were pathetically easy, honestly. Like, I enjoyed Arzette, but like I can only really say is that it was fun when I was playing it, but after I was done with it, I was like, yeah, that's pretty good, but honestly, it's not anything worth hyping up or anything like that. But yeah, next is Berserk Boy. Berserk Boy is another interesting one. It's very clearly inspired by Mega Man. Like, when I was playing it, I immediately got Mega Man. Actually, no, not even Mega Man. I got Mighty Number 9 vibes with it because of the whole dash mechanic and all that jazz. People were saying it was Zero, but another one that came to mind before Zero was Mega Man X5 of all games. Mega Man X5 is one of the messier Mega Man X games, I would say. I do like it, but I can't deny that it falls short in areas that X1 and X4 just didn't, or even X2. But this game basically feels like X5 in ways, like the overall stage design, and even the rescue replica. There's people you have to rescue in Berserk Boy, and I think you have to get some of them to progress. Either that or the Berserk tokens. Overall, I had a fun time with Berserk Boy. I do think it kind of falters near the end, and I do think that has to do with the overall bosses being very Superstars-esque in terms of the iframes. Not to say it's as bad as Superstars, but it definitely drags the pacing more than it should. But I overall had a fun time with Berserk Boy. And I would say if you're a Mega Man fan, give it a go. I think you'll like it. And now for the opinion that's probably gonna get me killed. Animal Well. I played Animal Well. I liked it, but I never really went as far as that, honestly. Like, I'm not gonna say I hate Video Game Donkey or anything like that, but I just don't really follow him per se. So I knew nothing about Animal Well, aside from the fact that it was gaining some momentum when it was coming out, and it was in talks of being the Indie Game of the Year nomination for Game of the Year. And I picked it up, not immediately when it came out, but around that time, and I beat it in the same day, and, well, I had fun with it, but I just thought that, like, this game that people were saying is one of the best indie games of the year was just kind of overblown to an extent. It had solid controls. I was always in control and never felt any slippery moments. It's fun to break the game with the bubble wand, but I just thought there were, like, many moments that were kind of frustrating. Like the cat. Is it a cat or a dog? It's the one where the mammal animal ghost follows you. I always thought that segment was, like, really bad. Like, it was to an extent where I had to cheese it to beat it. And that segment comes back at the end of the game, and I just wasn't an overall fan of it. I do like the atmosphere, though. I definitely think that's like one of the few things going for it, like, majorly. But other than that, it was fun. It was well polished, but it wasn't really doing anything to, like, blow me out of the water, particularly. If I have to play it again, I wouldn't mind, but I'm not gonna really, like, say it's the greatest achievement in all of gaming or anything like that. And now for the last 7 out of 10 game on this list, Celeste 64. Celeste 64 was a little game that came out around, like, the beginning of the, like, I think in January, actually. So it was the first game I played this year, and it was free. It was made by the Celeste devs, and it said that they took them a week to make it. And Celeste 64 is wearing its influence on its sleeve, not only in the title, but in terms of the gameplay. Cause Celeste 64 is a collectathon, and I think it's natural cause in Celeste, you're already collecting strawberries, or you have the want to collect strawberries. So doing that as an overall means of progression felt very natural given how its very status was in the original. There are some little things I don't like about the movement in 64. Like, I don't like the overall arc of the jump. I think it's a little too tight, and I wasn't an overall big fan of how dashing was incorporated in terms of how its radius or turn radius was handled. I think my problem just is overall with the air stuff, but like ground and dashing on ground and doing that stuff. They even kept some of the speedrun tactics, like carrying your momentum during a dash on the ground to make you go really fast and all that stuff. It's definitely a labor of love from the devs, and it is a very small game, so it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I overall had a pretty good time with it, and that's really about it. I definitely recommend it, and it's free as well, so it's not even that long either. I think even pretty not that good laptop could play it pretty well. Okay, let's do this. 8 out of 10 or above time. Let's go with, actually, do I prefer Mario and Luigi or Penny's Big Breakaway? Let's go with Mario and Luigi. Mario and Luigi Brothership was surprisingly good. So, a little context, I am a Mario and Luigi fan. I like Paper Mario, but I always thought Mario and Luigi was such a natural, not conclusion, but a natural fit for how Mario and Luigi RPGs should be handled. Like, obviously you can screw it up because Paper Jam exists, but like, its structure, its story, and most importantly its gameplay feel very Mario, which is why I like it more than Paper Mario, because as much as I really enjoyed Paper Mario, as we'll soon see later in the list or in the video, Paper Mario still to some extent feels very by the numbers in terms of its structure and its gameplay. So when I saw that Mario and Luigi was being done by other people that aren't formerly from Alpha Team, I was a little hesitant to not pick it up. I was a little hesitant to see if it would like stack up to, I don't want to say the original trilogy, but at the very least Dream Team, because I personally still like Dream Team. But honestly, Brothership surpassed Dream Team for me. So I think I'll get the easiest thing out of the way. I think the pacing in Brothership is its biggest detriment. Like, the beginning was way too long. Like, the first 3 hours were a slog to get through. Like, obviously you expect that out of the first area of a game because tutorial and all that stuff, but the tutorial pacing wasn't as bad as Dream Team. It's more so like how you go through the first world, where it's like, it's so slow and you don't really do much. And like, I know the game was made with backtracking in mind, and I am glad that there's also a fast sailing option to increase the pacing if you want, but I just felt like the basic sailing also was so slow, and it just made going from island to island in the first area just more of a slog than it really should have been. I also just wasn't a big fan of the pacing of the finale. Like the second act was great, and it was constantly getting better and better, and there are high points in the third act, like really high points, but I overall thought like you get to the final section of the game, and then you get to what you think is the final dungeon, and then it just goes on, and then you have to backtrack again and again and do more, and it's like you get to the final dungeon, and it just goes on for like an hour to 2 hours, and it's like, at that point I just wanted the game to end. But I think that Brothership excels more than it detriments. I think this is the best Mario and Luigi game in terms of its art style and its overall presentation. I think that the gameplay is still as fun as it's ever been, and I really like the battle plug mechanic because it can offer so much more variety to the combat, and it's not really a necessity because I went a good chunk with the game not using much of or any battle plugs, and I had a pretty fun time. And like I said, despite its hiccups, I do think the high points in Brothership are really high. Like, that final boss was just very anime. It was really fun. But yeah, I am pretty proud of Brothership, and I would be down for more Mario and Luigi games if they keep up this quality. I just hope that they can improve the pacing next time. Yeah, the next one is Penny's Big Breakaway. Penny's Big Breakaway was really fun. It was made by the same devs who did Sonic Mania, and Sonic Mania is very high regarded, especially in terms of Sonic. And so I was pretty excited to see what this game was all about. And so I picked it up during the summer Steam sale, and I beat it in 2 days. And it was really fun. I think what I like about this game is that it has that very same arcadey design philosophy that Sega games are well known for, where on the first go around you're not gonna know that much about the game or the intricate stuff, but when you go back, it's when you're like, oh yeah, this is how you do it. Like, I played it for like the first half of Penny's Big Breakaway like a typical platformer, and yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. But then I got to around the halfway point where I learned like, oh, I can use this to gain momentum, and I can do these tricks as well. And it was like, it felt like learning how to use the spin dash to skip the pace breaker of Chemical Plant in Sonic 2 all over again for me, and it was really fun. I didn't really know what was going on in the story half the time. I think it was like Penny was like a convict or something. I don't know. I just know there was a lot of penguins, and penguins are the cutest animal ever. Level design was consistent. It was always pretty good. I had a smile on my face when I was going through it. There are no pace breakers from what I remember of this game, and surprisingly the bosses were pretty fun for what they were. I also like the music in this game a lot. It was actually pretty catchy. The best way to describe Penny's Big Breakaway is that it feels like a lost Sega Saturn or Sega Dreamcast game that came to light, and I think that's pretty neat if I do say so myself. Okay, number 9. Yeah, I think this one's going to Zelda. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom was pretty fun. I was allowed to play the demo of it because I went to PAX West, and I definitely did tell my friends that it was definitely a demo I was glad I played, because I've never been the biggest on open world Zelda. Like, they're fun games and all, but they clearly are made with a certain group in mind, and I would have preferred if I had first-hand experience with them, especially with Tears of the Kingdom in retrospect. But with Echoes of Wisdom, I knew there was something unique going with the game, and I definitely do like what they were going for. So I picked it up on launch day. It took me a month to beat it, and that was pretty dang good. Like, it was really good actually. It's probably my favorite open form world decision Zelda game between the three. Like, I do think there are low points in the game. I do think that the dungeons are not the most well handled. Like, they were fun and all, but I just think like the overall decision to have your echoes basically break it for you was just not as intrinsic as I thought it was gonna be. I also wasn't really all that captivated by the story in this one. Like, there were some things I liked. I liked the abominable snowman guy. Like, he had a pretty tragic backstory and all that jazz. And I do like seeing the Deku in a 2D Zelda game. They were really cute. But the story just never really left much of an impression, aside from the fact that we play as Zelda in this one. And I really like that we get to play as Zelda in this one. But I'm also a little sad that we don't really get to see Zelda talk in this one, because one of the things that makes Zelda stories work not that well for me is that Link is mute, yeah. Cause like, one of the best ways to immerse a player into the world of a game is if they are shown through the protagonist in a certain way, and talking is a good way to do that. But aside from the emotions, I don't think Link is all that interesting of a character to see through the protagonist's perspective. But with Zelda, she's allowed to talk and all that jazz. But in Echoes of Wisdom, they removed that from her, and it was kind of a letdown. But there is things I do like in Echoes of Wisdom. It's that high for a reason. I really liked the ecosystem. I don't like the UI for the ecosystem because it's Tears of the Kingdom in terms of its UI, and no one likes that overall. But I do like that I have the ability to grab objects and enemies and utilize them to my advantage. When I saw the bed, I was like, oh yeah, this is easily gonna be like one of, if not the best echo in the game. And it was the best echo for the first half of the game, but in the second half you get better ones and all that jazz. And it was really fun. It was also fun to like utilize the echoes for combat and puzzles and all that stuff. It was just fun to like go around the overworld and grab heart pieces. It was really fun in an intrinsic way. I am a bit mixed on sword fighter mode though. It definitely feels like they were obliged to have it in there. Like, you needed some way to have Link in it without Link being in it, if that makes any sense. So it feels like not tacked on, because that would imply that it wasn't planned out, because it definitely feels like it was planned out, but it was definitely like mandatory that was be there. Other than that, it was like, yeah, it's Zelda. It's typical from what I expect from Zelda, and it was really fun. It is my preferred of the 3 open form decision world Zelda games. But honestly, aside from that, it's like, what else can we do with that formula of Zelda, honestly? Okay. I think this is where I reached 9 out of 10. Yeah, this is... Okay. These next 8 slots are all 9 out of 10s. They are games I really liked, really enjoyed or left an impression on me in a certain way. Let's talk about Elden Ring. So, I replayed Elden Ring earlier this year to prepare myself for the DLC. And while I've grown to appreciate more about Elden Ring, a lot actually, to the point where it's like almost, not top 10 games, but like almost 10 out of 10 for me, I do think there are some lows in Elden Ring that could be fixed, because my biggest problem is the final boss. In base Elden Ring, I do not like Elden Beast whatsoever. Like Redigan, he's cool. He is a worthy final boss, but Elden Beast is annoying. And there are some balancing issues, but overall I thought Elden Ring was pretty dang fantastic. I can definitely see why people consider it the best FromSoft game. Shadow of the Erdtree is basically a lesser Elden Ring base game for me. It still is typical with Elden Ring. You go around this giant area, you look for bosses, and you kill the bosses. You can go through the story and all that jazz. And that's what I did. It took me about 3 days to beat. But Shadow of the Erdtree, after talking about it with a friend some more, it feels like it doubles down on the problems I had with base game Elden Ring. There are some bosses I really liked. I liked the Twin Moon Knight. Mesmir is the poster boy for a reason, and he is both hot and fucking fun. But then there are bosses like the Hippo and the final boss that just reinforce the problems I have with some Souls games in terms of bosses, especially the final boss. We'll get to him later. The Shadow Tree Fragment system is one I am not a big fan of. Like, the idea that there's a level beyond your typical level up system is pretty cool, but the problem is that you get them via looking around the world. And now, I normally don't have a problem with that if it was like a condensed area, but the Shadow Realm is basically Caelid and Limgrave kind of fused in terms of its scale. So it's going to take like about 3/4 or 4/5 of the area to find all the Shadow Tree fragments to be ready for the final boss. And then there's the final boss. I think it is no shock that no one likes Radahn in Shadow of the Erdtree. Radahn was a cool fight in base game because it was all spectacle and you had plenty of teammates with that fight. But for Erdtree, what's the problem with him is that he doesn't feel balanced. Like, the first phase, even after all the patches, is pretty fun. Like, it's a worthy opponent for your skill level and all that jazz, especially if you're that far into the game. But I thought the second phase was utter bullshit. Like, all you had to do to dodge most of his attacks was to hold on to his right leg the entire time, and even that you would get like 2, maybe 3 hits in, and it's not enough if you're not even at the proper level into the shadow fragments. And then there are just some attacks where it's like it's nearly impossible to dodge, and it's really annoying. I remember I was playing against him and I was fucking frustrated, and I couldn't really change my build because I was a dual katana set when you normally cheese this boss with the dual hammer strength build, but I don't have that, so I was stuck with my dual katanas. So it took me 5 hours, but I finally beat it. But I will say this, for how utter bullshit Radahn was, I have never screamed fuck yeah so loud in my life. So I do like Shadow of the Erdtree. It does have the same strength as base game Elden Ring, but I will say it does double down on the parts I didn't like in Elden Ring. So it's a lesser experience, so I'd rather just play base game Elden Ring, especially since I don't like the final boss in Erdtree. Next is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a very divisive title, and so is Rebirth. Now, I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I not only really enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but I do think that Rebirth is better than Remake, and because of one thing, its overall content. It improves from Remake from the fact that it covers the rest of the first disc of Final Fantasy VII. So you are getting everything post Midgar up to the finale of disc 1. And I think that's a lot more better, and I think that's better for the game's pacing, since well, Midgar drew out longer than it really should in Remake, in my opinion. The gameplay of 7 Rebirth is improved and has some new things going for it. Air attacks are in this game. Cloud has some options to deal with air opponents without needing to jump or any of that jazz. There are plenty of new characters in this game that you could play as. You could play as Red 13, Kasith, Yuffie, and there are new ways to play with other characters as well, with playing certain characters with the team mechanic. I think it's really well nuanced and fun. I would say that 7 Rebirth and Remake are the best ways to handle an action-focused Final Fantasy game. Like, it's an action RPG, but it still has the menuing and all that stuff that's well known with Final Fantasy. Even for as much as I enjoyed 15, as for as much as I love 16. I really like the presentation and voice acting in this game. It is all well done. The bosses were really fun as well. Like, I've really enjoyed my time with the bosses, especially with Rufus and the Gold Saucer. I also really liked the music in 7 Rebirth. It was phenomenal. Like, I went to the 7 Rebirth concert, and I cried like really hard watching it. If I were to have my problems with 7 Rebirth, I will say that I do think that even though it is better pace, it still has those slow moments that no one really likes in 7 Remake. Especially in Nibelheim, where he plays Kasith. That is the worst segment of the game. The story is also at odds with itself in the same way as Remake, where it wants to do some things the same and some things different, and it just clashes. I know that's kind of the point, but it's kind of hard to tell a good majority of the time. And I think the finale went on longer than it should have. And I think the finale was really confusing by the end. It was to the point where I had to look up on Wikipedia and some YouTube videos about it. But yeah, I had fun with 7 Rebirth. I think the one thing about the 7 Remake trilogy that keeps me from not hating it, but like not straying away from it, is that even if you don't like it that much, I think it's to the point where it's like we're kind of invested enough to see how it's gonna end, since the next game is gonna be the last one. But yeah, I really like 7 Rebirth, and I know Snackago is gonna kill me for it. Okay, now we could go another Crab's Treasure or X8 16-bit. I'll go with X8 16-bit. Mega Man X8 16-bit is a fan game, and it finished this year around October, and I've been following this game since 2022 when we got the first demo, and it finished this year, and I beat it all in 2 days, and I thought it was fantastic from beginning to end. Mega Man X8 16-bit feels like your typical Mega Man X game, but it reminds me a lot of the SNES games in terms of its structure and its stage layout and design, its aesthetics, its boss fights, and its routing system, which was also an X4. Like, I don't have much to say about Mega Man X8 16-bit that hasn't already been said by other well-known Mega Man YouTubers. It's very well made. It trounces over the original X8 in my opinion, for as much as I enjoy X8, spoiler alert for when I eventually get to that video. I'd say what keeps this from being one of my all-time top 5 is that I do think that the desperation attacks in X8 16-bit are a little too much at times. Like, Gigabolt Manowar was manageable, but I thought Dark Mantis was a little overboard. And there's even some bosses that aren't even secret bosses in the finale were just a little too much, like the first Sigma fight. But I overall had a fantastic time with Mega Man 8 16-bit. It is easily, if it was official, it would be my 3rd or 4th favorite Mega Man X game behind X4, X1, and maybe Maverick Hunter X. So yeah, I highly recommend X8 16-bit. I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, top 5 time. At number 5 is Another Crab's Treasure. Another Crab's Treasure blew me away. Like, I was not expecting this to surpass Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, but it somehow did. It is typical of what you expect from a Souls-like. You know, your typical, you got reviving enemies, bosses that are really hard, and a skill ceiling. But I think Another Crab's Treasure stands out in its gameplay, its story, and its overall tone. Another Crab's Treasure is very much, looks like a kid's game. Like, you know, it's jokingly Little Mermaid Souls, and That's honestly both the best way to talk about it and the worst way to talk about it. Because yeah, it looks like Little Mermaid, but it's not really like the same in tone. So in terms of gameplay, you have the shell system, and I really like the shell system. It's not only your shield, but it's also your magic system. And because of that, and since you're using shells most if not all the time, you can basically do whatever build you want. I personally went with a strength build with a good amount of health and dexterity, but I can't deny that the shell and magic have helped me a lot when fighting bosses, especially towards the end. The tone of this game is also not what you expect. Like, you expect like, oh, this man or this crab lost his shell, so you need to find it. And it does start like that. It's basically, I committed tax evasion, I must pay my taxes, basically. But very quickly, you learn that this game's gonna go in a much different direction. Because this game talks about how the ocean is coated in trash. And yes, that is very sad to think about in our current day and age, to the point where we have to rely on certain organizations to deal with that instead of having big corporations, all that jazz. It also goes into, but it's also kind of sad in the context of this game, because the trash is also the currency, the souls, the runes of this game, where you use them to level up and all that jazz, level up and buy stuff. Because it also feeds into how certain classes of people affect each other, and it's all dictated by how much trash or wealth they have, and how certain people can be corrupted by that. That's why I think it all led up to the final boss very well, showing how his goal for helping the ocean isn't to get rid of the trash, it's by producing more of it, which is sure it's gonna be, he thinks it's going to be great, but in actuality it's going to cause more danger than all that he expected. That's why I really enjoyed Another Crab's Treasure. It basically lied to us by its trailer and basically said, here's what the game really is, enjoy, and I really enjoyed Another Crab's Treasure. It wasn't even that long either. It took me like 12 hours to beat it, but I'm a Souls veteran and I'm just very good at Souls games, so take that as you will, but yeah, I highly recommend Another Crab's Treasure. Okay, so these next 4, they're all 10 out of 10 for me. It's basically a decision of which one do I want to rank in there, because I love all 4 of these games. They're all 4 of some of my favorite games ever made. But I don't know how I want to go about this. I know what number 1 is, but I don't know about 2, 3, and 4. You know what? For as much as I love it, I will put Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door below. Not below, but the weakest of the 4. Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is one of the most iconic Mario RPGs out there, probably the most iconic Mario RPG out there next to Bowser's Inside Story. It is well beloved. People have been asking for a remake of this game for basically almost 2 decades. Well, actually, no, not 2 decades, basically a decade. And we finally got it almost around the time Thousand Year Door became 20. And I picked it up on launch day and I will say Thousand Year Door Remake might be my preferred version of the game now. Like, there's overall some things that my friend Knack from the Anonymous Gamers podcast would tell you that is why he prefers the original, like some of the music choices and all that jazz and certain decisions. But I'm not that nostalgic blind for Thousand Year Door Remake. But I will say this. What makes Thousand Year Door Remake my preferred version is the quality of life improvements. And I want to notably talk about 2 of those improvements. The first one is that I really like the partner ring. The partner ring is basically a way for you to pick your partner without having to go to a menu all the time. It's very convenient. You just need to do it through the press of the L button, switch to your character, and then they immediately switch out. It's so much faster that it kind of feels like it should have been the original game. And what kicks the next quality of life feature, is the improved fast travel room. In the original, you had to constantly go back to the underground and constantly unlock new warp pipes via certain means to get to where you wanted to go. It was a bit of a slog, I'm not gonna lie. But in the remake, it's all dedicated to one room, And after you beat a chapter or reach a certain point in the game, you unlock the warp pipe to head to that area, and that's all you have to do. You don't have to travel between rooms, you don't have to unlock certain upgrades, you just need to reach a certain requirement and you'll get the warp pipe. It honestly made General White like 8 minutes faster. I wish I was joking. Like I was dreading General White, and then the improvements of the fast travel just overall made it more fun. But other than that, it's your typical remake from what you expect from Nintendo. It's very by the numbers, but those quality of life features honestly make it for me to the point where I think I prefer the remake over the original, even for as much as I love the original. I think I'll go Astrobot with this one. Astrobot is probably the biggest surprise in terms of 2024 games for me, because it feels like a bygone era of the PlayStation era, or just the gaming era in general. It is a very fun platformer. I really liked all the levels. I liked the overall variety in terms of its gameplay and power-ups. The soundtrack was fucking phenomenal. But what made Astrobot for me was the overall celebration it is in terms of its PlayStation IP. Like, we generally look at PlayStation and we're like, oh, we wish we did more of this, more of that, or like, oh, there's too many third-person over-the-shoulder games or stuff like that. Astrobot feels like a bygone era of PlayStation. Well, not bygone era because it exists in the current day, but like, it feels like it goes back to the PlayStation roots for why it became popular with Crash Bandicoot and other platformers of that era, like Jumping Flash and Tombi. But it's also a celebration of PlayStation. Like, you get, like, the main collectible are the robots, the Astrobots, if you will. And in almost every level, about half of the bots are callbacks to certain PlayStation games. And what I love about this is that it calls back to not only some classic PlayStation stuff like Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, etc. The modern stuff like Persona 5, God of War, Horizon, some niche stuff like Klonoa, but there are some like deep cuts in its roster, like PlayStation Tech Demos, Viva Ribbon, I think is what that one's called, and something as minuscule as the Dreams icon. It's just so fascinating to see. You can clearly tell from like the overall like stuff you can collect with these robots and how certain characters were integrated. That's like, they clearly knew what they were doing, and they clearly wanted to show that the PlayStation, no matter what it's going through, will always be a cherishable property. And that's why that, alongside fun bosses, phenomenal soundtrack, fun gameplay, and really good levels, I think Astrobot is not only one of the best games of last year, but probably one of the best 3D platformers I've ever played, and I am so happy to say that. So the second one is a game I wish I haven't played, not because I hate it, because I sunk so many hours into it. Balatro is a game I've become thoroughly addicted to. Now, I think you've heard that story before, like almost from everyone who's played it. They lost their life to it. Why is that? Balatro is a roguelike poker game. You basically have to get as many chips as possible to progress to the next round. There is an endpoint, but there's also an endless mode, and there are many decks, and there are many challenges. And within those challenges and decks, there are certain builds you can do. Like, I could have one build be primarily pairs or 2 pairs, and I can have the next one be flushes or royal flushes and all that jazz. It's a gameplay loop I become infatuated by, and it also helps that the roguelite elements make it not a snore fest, honestly. Like, you got jokers that can grant buffs or certain aspects to cards or collecting cards. You got packs that can contain celestial cards, arcane cards, spectral cards, playing cards. There are vouchers that could give you benefits. It's such an in-depth card game for what it is. And that high of just getting further and further, or reaching that point where you reach the next level of your favorite deck, is something that just never gets old, honestly. There's not much to say about Balatro other than that. I think Balatro is a fantastic game through and through, and it has easily become one of my favorite indie games ever made, alongside Hades and and Shovel Knight. And so, since it's the last one, and since it's my profile picture, I guess it's no shock that Sonic X Shadow Generations is my favorite game of last year. Sonic X Shadow Generations, I think you could say it's predictable since Sonic Generations is my favorite Sonic game. But I want to talk about Shadow Generations actually. Shadow Generations is probably the best 3D Sonic game we've gotten since Sonic Generations, and I generally liked Frontiers and Lost World. It is very, very well done. I think the best attribute of Shadow Generations is its level design. The controls are very good. They build off of Frontiers and Generations, and they are very well done. But the level design of Shadow is on another level. It takes the best aspects of the Boost level design and fully went for it. Like, I cannot express how fun Kingdom Valley is when I first played it. I was like, this is probably the best 3D... It actually probably is the best 3D level in the series. For as much as I love Rooftop Run, Generations, and Rooftop Run and Unleashed. But there's also, like, extensions to Shadow's gameplay and Shadow Generations that make him so much fun and distinct him from Sonic. The Chaos Spear, the Doom Wings, the Doom Morph, the Doom Surf, they all feel like very Shadow and they make him very fun. I also really like the story in Sonic X Shadow Generations. It makes Shadow confront his past again, but in a context that's much, not fresh, but much more unique compared to other games like Sonic Adventure 2 or Shadow Generations. I know everyone was saying that it got me to tear up, and I do get it. I personally wasn't affected by it, but I do like how they handled Shadow in this game a lot. They really understood who Shadow is, and his reactions and talks with Gerald and Maria are just honestly super sweet. The moment when he smiled in the game, I actually said, I felt my heart melt a little bit. It was so good. But yeah, Sonic X Shadow Generations is my favorite game of last year, one of my favorite games of all time, and I am so glad to say that. I just hope Sega can keep up this winning streak.